It is amazing how quickly I forget how to do any of this. If we miss a week. We're live where we need to be. All right. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about A Dream of Rome. But before we do that, buddy, I want to tell the folks what it is we do on this podcast.
Listen, on this podcast, we analyze the historical accuracy of movies in 2024 that are sequels to movies from the year 2000 that also wasn't incredibly historically accurate in the first place, but at least way more than this one.
I'm pretty sure Ridley Scott's most historically accurate movie was Alien. So, you know.
Honestly, well, so there's a much better argument to be made that the original Gladiator was spiritually historically accurate, if not like authentically historically accurate.
Right.
For instance, Commodus, who's the villain of that, was famously the gladiator emperor, right? You know, like he was the emperor who was going and competing in gladiatorial games. So it kind of made sense that he was the bad guy, even though...
And he was assassinated by a wrestler, I believe. So it's, you know, it's not exactly one-to-one what happens in the movie. By the way, there's going to be spoilers for the first Gladiator, definitely, probably in this preamble. So sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you know, a 25-year-old film is a little too much. Yeah.
But yes, no, like to your like again, just to continue, he was murdered by a wrestler or assassinated by a wrestler, which was, you know, kind of sort of what happens in the first movie. Obviously, a little bit different. But so the second movie came out. I actually the week before seeing the second movie watched the first one for the first time, which yeah,
you had never seen the original Gladiator?
No, I mean,
wow.
Yeah, it's just something I'd never gotten around to.
Did you now I'm like incredibly interested. Did you like it?
Yeah, no, I thought it was awesome.
Okay. Got that. Okay. Good. Okay. Good then.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure it was a hold up. I think of it as a movie that ages pretty poorly in the sense that the thing that made like, I work with a lot of younger kids than like us or whatever, like 10 years younger than us or whatever. And we had a conversation about Best Picture winners, and somebody was like, "How did Gladiator win Best Picture?" And it was it was impossible to tell. It was impossible to explain this. I was like, seeing the Colliseum in kind of all of its glory because of CGI, this was truly revolutionary at the time, right? Like the idea that you could use CGI in order to sort of deliver on one of these historical epics. I mean, Titanic did the same thing, obviously. Another famous movie that I deeply enjoy. That was just like a huge deal at the time, and now it's completely commonplace, and everyone would take it for granted. TV shows can do it to levels of historical authenticity that are whatever else. So
yeah, I mean, I think the story still holds up, right? Like, I think winning Best Picture is also an interesting thing because, like, that's like when that was still kind of like what a prestige movie was, if that makes sense, right? Like now the movies that win Oscars are ones that have like that say something important is kind of my the way I put it in kind of like some words, right? Like it's not.
Yeah, Gladiator was the second highest grossing movie of that year after Mission Impossible 2. When was the last time that there was any kind of Best Picture nominee that was even close to that level of like kind of crowd pleaser,
Yeah. No, I mean, and we all like all of the serious cinema people like laughed when someone was like, well, Endgame should win, right? Like, and I don't know. I think there's definitely something there because, like, there's been kind of a split of like the spectacle movie doesn't quite always get like that level of like prestige movie treatment. Although I think, like Dune and Dune 2, right? Like kind of hit that, and like what's the other one? Only other one that like kind of hit me like that. I want to say Cyberpunk. It's not Cyberpunk. It's the sequel to Blade Runner.
Blade Runner 20. Yeah, these are all Denis Villeneuve. See, this is actually, I think, really what it is that prestige directors would make these huge, gigantic blockbusters back then, which is not necessarily something that happens in today's day and age. Even somebody like Steven Spielberg, I guess, will sometimes do these big blockbusters, like he'll do Ready Player One or something. That's just like a very conventional kind of blockbuster out of Steven Spielberg, right? But even that, it's not like a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I feel like that's kind of Denis is an interesting sort of counterexample, because even though, you know, whatever, Dune is a franchise movie based on a big IP or whatever else, he really kind of like made it his own in the same way that we would consider.
I mean,
I would probably say like a number of other.
yeah, I mean, I would also say that, like, you know, describing Dune that way is interesting, right? Like, Dune has always been weird, right? Like, you know, and obviously it's like a foundational piece of science fiction, but it's like,
Sure. All
yeah.
I'm saying is that Dune shares more culturally with Star Wars and Jurassic Park than Schindler's List.
Yeah,
Do you
no,
know
that's
what I
fair.
mean?
Yes,
Like,
no,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. There's oh, and like, you know, I think Ridley Scott is one of these directors. I
Mhm.
think the most disappointed I have ever been watching a trailer was when I saw this like great like science fiction epic looking movie, and it turned out to be like another alien film directed by, it was like, god damn it, I do not like, you know, famously all of these like alien films are like bad past, you know, Aliens or whatever. um and I didn't care about it.
Listen, I'm a Prometheus enjoyer in this house. Okay, we can talk maybe about whether or not Prometheus is a good movie or a bad movie, but
I I
uh,
I haven't seen it, so I wouldn't know. But this was the most recent one where it's like people escaping from the planet, and they go to like this abandoned satellite, and there's the twist you find out like halfway through the trailer is that there's, you know, there's like aliens on board, right? Like, you know, like the aliens.
yeah, this might have been Covenant or Requiem, maybe. Um,
But
anyway, yeah, whatever.
essentially, I was like, oh, awesome, a new like, you know, high stakes prestige science fiction movie. And it's like, oh, it's aliens again, right? Like, you know,
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, as Ridley Scott is really weird about this because he just has some complete dog shit in his like kind of like repertoire. But Gladiator, you know, Blade Runner, like he is a hero of some of these just truly insane, really well made movies. Gladiator, I mean, I am a huge Gladiator one enjoyer and defender. I wrote a paper in college that said that it was the best that we had a thing that was like over the course of the semester we had to read like 10 scripts, like features, and then at the very end we had to write a paper, so it's not quite the final but kind of like it, about which of the features that we read had the best script, and I chose Gladiator. And it's actually for the same reason that I like Aquaman, right? Like Gladiator, it's the Gladiator script is not amazing because it is, you know, incredibly like deep and moving, or it has some, you know, super complex to nuanced theme to get after or anything like that. It is a simple story told well, right? There are so many great lines and speeches in there. Just these transcendent moments that completely carry from the page to the screen. That I think it's like it's probably the best script I've ever written or ever read. Outside of maybe Brokeback Mountain, that's also a very good script. Brokeback Mountain
yeah,
is one of the best scripts I've ever read.
I don't think I've read a script. I mean, I've been there's no, I mean, like as a script, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I read Streetcar Named Desire because I had to for school, but like, and there's been a couple I've considered, just because, like, you know, like I have somewhere the, you know, Max Landis put out the original script for Bright. I was like, I should read this, compare it to the movie, and then I never did.
That is actually fun. This is one of the things, and I think it's a hard skill to decipher, is what makes a good script versus what makes it. Like there are some scripts that are bad, but the movies are great, and there are some movies that are bad, but the scripts are great. That's actually a pretty common sort of thing, and it's because that jump adds sort of so much. And part of what you learn, at least doing this sort of like script level analysis kind of thing, is like, when is a monologue really exciting for an actor, right? Like when, as an actor, as I'm reading a script, do I look at a character and I go, oh my God, this is an amazing part, I want to play this part, right? Versus, wow, this like monologue is so tedious and boring and there's nothing going on in it and it's just a complete kind of like waste of my time, right? Like there's a very fine line between those two things. And Yeah, and back when I started in Los Angeles, I haven't read a feature script in maybe 10 years, but when I started in Los Angeles, I was reading scripts all the time because I was doing it semi-professionally, I guess.
Nice.
Do you call intern work professional? I guess I was doing
Yeah.
it professionally. I was an intern. Yeah.
Nice. Well, getting back to the topic at hand, I suppose we both watched Gladiator 2. We should give our pre-spoiler impressions. 10
Okay,
minutes
I
in.
loved it. I said I loved everything about it, which is not quite true, but it's probably a contender for movie of the year for me. It's tough. It's a great movie though. I loved everything. Highly recommend it. I think it's perfect for the theater. I'm so glad I watched it in the theater and I didn't wait until it came to whatever, because I think I got so much more out of it from the theater. I have a lot of caveats to this, which we will explain as we go on. But I think Gladiator II is an excellent film if you view it with the right lens, I should say. I keyed into this incredibly quickly, and it's because it's kind of made for me in a way. And I feel like there are going to be a lot of people out in the world who aren't going to view it that way, and they're going to get mad. But for me, this was great. I loved this movie.
I thought it was bad, but I didn't hate it. This is like if the the kind of apex of sequels is it rhymes like poetry, or kind of like what it was, soft sea boots, right? Is it rhymes like poetry, and the nadir is the Force Awakens, right? Like I found this was more towards the Force Awakens than
really. Okay.
And I think part of that for me is also that I watched the original Gladiator like a couple days before I saw this, right? So like all the things that are like similar but worse just kind of like really stuck out to me.
That's really interesting. Okay, very cool. Okay, so I guess here for points for spoilers, yeah. So I would say, man, what is the apex of this? Probably Top Gun Maverick. Actually, is maybe I don't know. I mean, I like Blade Runner for oh man, that's actually really interesting. What do you think is the best one of these ever?
Ever?
My two thoughts here are Top Gun Maverick, which I think is a truly excellent picture. We didn't do a podcast on it though, but I love that movie.
I didn't see it. I didn't get around to seeing it. I've seen neither Top Gun, so
really, yeah. Well, so the interesting thing about Top Gun Maverick is that the first Top Gun sucks. It is kind of a bad movie, but like it's a bad movie with a bunch of really awesome shots, and it's very memeable kind of in a way, which is why it like persisted in the pop culture. But like it's not a good movie in my estimation. It kind of has a bunch of these problems. Top Gun Maverick is an excellent picture, like an excellent movie, and the reason I instantly jumped to it to say Apex is because it improves quite a lot on the original, right? So we have the regular one, and then Maverick is just like, it's not just updating the whatever lore of the movie to match 2024, right? It is also updating kind of the quality standards for the movie, because Top Gun came out in the 80s and everybody loved it, but they just basically loved it for the vibes. It's just a vibes movie at that point, which was sort of my argument about Tenet a couple of weeks ago. But Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, is so good, right? Like what an amazing picture, right? And then Blade Runner 2049, also a very good movie. These are both excellent movies, kind of thing. And so I don't know that I would consider, I would probably consider Blade Runner 2049 to be a better picture than Top Gun Maverick, but because there's that huge jump in quality, I kind of want to say that one is sort of like better than the other.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Yeah,
I want to like do a whole tier list for this now. I'm thinking about so many of these.
Yeah, I mean,
like Matrix Resurrections, that's like perfect mid, I feel like.
I think it's worse than Gladiator 2. But
you think Matrix Resurrections is worse than Gladiator 2?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I didn't like Matrix Resurrections very much.
Oh, okay. I remember liking a lot of. I didn't think it held together all that well, but I the gang got back together. And I remember really liking a lot of little things in that movie. And so this is what I'm thinking about. Like, it has a lot of problems, but the heart is in the right place. It's like a mid-level.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
might
then The
even
Force Awakens is.
I might disagree. See, I might disagree with its heart being in the right place, and like that's
Really?
part that's what really kind of like sinks it for me is it, or what sinks a lot of these soft sea boots for me is like failing on the sea part of, you know, the soft sea boot thing, right? Like this is part of what like Force Awakens really falls flat on its face. It feels like I don't think Matrix Resurrection does not feel like a cheap cash grab. I felt like Force Awakens kind of does, right? Like, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, A New Hope, but didn't he, right? Like, and not properly like aligning with the original work is a thing that really gets to me, and I think 2049 does it well. But I don't think that Resurrections or Force Awakens did it well, and I just don't know if I can think. There are very few of these soft sea boots that I would call good, even.
I'm trying to think of some, like, what are some of the other ones? Like long running sequels. Like, what are some of these film series that have these insanely long running sequels?
Soft sea boot. Nope. Movies. Because it's like a soft sequel reboot. Soft sequel reboot.
I feel like if I were to like go look at a list, I could see a million of these. But I'm trying to see.
Number one soft reboot, Batman Forever. Yeah, because a lot like the thing is that a lot of these miss like the soft sequel reboot, or they miss the sequel part of the C-boot, right? Like, because like you just reboot it, right, and it's kind of fine, right? Like Batman, you know, like I would not call the Christopher Nolan Batman movies a, you know, a C-boot of.
Yeah, same thing with Robert Pattinson or any
Yeah.
of these other ones, right? Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Lou says that he lists that as Batman Forever as the best anything is automatically wrong. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's enough here to talk more about the Seaboots. So do you want?
Yeah, that's fine. Well, there's so much to talk about with Gladiator 2. Okay, so what made it bad? What's your?
So the thing that I didn't really cotton on to the premise of the movie until I had seen the first one, and so I did not think it was implied that Lucianus was Russell Crowe's son. I cannot remember any of these character names. And I thought that making him his son makes like is one of those things that, like, you know, as much as it can retroactively, like makes the first movie worse, right? Like, because part of what is Russell Crowe's name? Is it Maximus?
Maximus.
Yeah, part of Maximus
Decimus Meridius.
Yeah. Part of Maximus,
husband to a slain wife, father to a murdered husband, you know, son or whatever. And
right.
I will have my vengeance. God, he has so many great moments in that movie.
Some of that is undercut by Lucianus being his son, I think. Right. Like,
okay.
And so
I also think it's just Lucius, by the way.
Oh, Lucius, yeah.
I think it's Lucius Varus or Aurelius. I don't know. I mean, I can't remember. I saw it literally last night, less than 24 hours ago, and a bunch of these. What was Pedro Pascal's character's name? Like, Acelius or something? I don't remember. Anyway.
But yeah, I think the only one I really remember is like Porto, which is the slave master from the first movie, right? But sorry, I think so. Like, part of Maximus's arc is that he gets his vengeance, and then he is able to peacefully pass on into the afterlife, having like done the thing he set out to do, put a new spark into the dream of Rome, right? and died a martyr, right? Like, and so there is a part of the when we previously have talked about Watchmen sequels, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is an example of a bad Cebu, in my opinion. Like, as a Cebu, right? Like, the Watchmen TV show that we talked about a while ago is, if you do a follow up to the Watchmen, you have to answer the question: what was the result of Rorschach mailing the truth to the Crank Journal, right? I think that question is best unanswered as a piece of the art, and I think that there is, obviously Rome did not become a republic again, right? But we know from real life, but it's Scott,
Famously, yeah.
yeah, and after I watched the first one, I was like, is there going to be like a Rome cinematic universe where like there's like an alternate, because that'd be a fun thing, right?
Actually, the part of it that bothers me the most on a historical level, I am willing to forgive so much. We'll talk about historical accuracy because I have a whole thing about it. I'm willing to forgive so much about the historical accuracy of this movie, kind of, except for the idea that Rome was diminishing, because, to be frank, this is sort of Rome at the height of its power, which is like, maybe you could make an argument, that like, I don't know, that like the decline is starting to happen, but it's not it's like another 150 years, which is just like an astronomical amount of time.
Right.
Half of the length that the United States have been around. More than that, honestly. Like 150 years later, you have Constantine splits the empire into East and West, and then another like 300 years after that's when the Western Roman Empire actually falls to Attila in like the 600s or 700s or something like that. And so it's just wild to frame an empire that is going to continue existing for another 400 years as being in decline. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, and that actually doesn't bother me so much because again, like, Ridley Scott's trying to tell a story here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and the story is only like loosely connected with the truth of the real Roman Empire. That doesn't bother me so much.
It's funny that bothers me, but it doesn't bother you, actually.
Yeah, no, because like, if I'm going to accept a non-historical Rome, right? Like, I would like to imagine, a alternate history Rome where Maximus restores the Republic with his dying breath, right? And like, and that extends forward. And I think there was a worse version of that story here, right? Like, I think that the emperors in this movie were worse than Commodus. I was telling you a little bit about before the show, but Ben Dreyfuss has a piece on the Substack about this movie, and he points out, and I think I agree with him here, is that Commodus is essentially like the one Ham in like an otherwise played straight cast, and that really works. And the emperors here don't quite get there, right? Like, and there's a little bit more kind of like goofiness overall, right? In the world of the movie. And I, part of that's, I think, supposed to, it's them trying to show, like, I guess, effectively the decadence of Rome, I guess, is like the theory that's happening here. But I just don't think it lands. Also, I don't think that what's his face is as good an actor as Russell Crowe, right? Like, I don't think the protagonist of this movie is nearly so good as the protagonist as the last movie. I think his backstory doesn't quite resonate with it. I think that he kind of, like, I don't quite buy his arc, right? Like, there's just like a bunch of stuff in there that just like kind of quite, it just doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't quite gel for me. I don't hate it. My fiance absolutely despised the movie.
So what's that about? Why did she hate it so much?
She when we watched it, she called it like a cheap cash grab. She's also like a historian by trade, and so I think the historical inaccuracies like really bothered her, right? Like,
Sure.
though again, spoilers for this movie. The great white sharks in the Colosseum were just like, what the fuck, right? Like that was the thing that like I know that was like just too much. So that I think that's what really ground her gears. But for me, the single biggest thing is I thought the premise was bad, and so that kind of like tainted the rest of the movie to me, right? It would be fine. It would probably even have been fine if Lucius wasn't Maximus's son. Like, he doesn't need to be Maximus's son, right? Like, I think it would have even. This is a part of it too. Like, it could have been like the same storyline without him being his son, right? And it kind of undercuts the whole restore the Republic thing, right? Because like Lucius being the inheritor of Maximus's ideals by dint of being an idealist is a better story than Lucius inheriting Maximus's ideals by dint of being his son, which is like the thing they're fighting against, right? Like, the monarchical, empire, right? Being handed down from father to son. And that's a little bit looser, a little bit like a little bit less, but like, I still think it's bad. And and I feel like if you're not on board with a lot of the kind of like core stuff, it's just kind of the rest of it kind of falls out underneath it. I didn't particularly enjoy Denzel's character, although I think that like that's just I think me not enjoying Denzel's character is more me not being on board with the movie than him being bad.
Yeah, like once you pull the thread on the sweater, it's just you get annoyed by all these little bullshit things. I totally understand that. Okay, I get that for sure.
Yeah, like Denzel not having a British accent, right? It's just kind of like
yeah. I mean, everybody had wildly different British accents.
Sure.
So what are you gonna do with that kind of thing? Yeah, I feel that. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, see, it's funny because the thing that kicked in that got me to love this movie. Do you know what my favorite Shakespeare play is?
I do not.
Have we ever talked about this? Do you like Shakespeare? What's your feelings on Shakespeare?
I don't have strong opinions on Shakespeare.
Okay. My favorite Shakespeare play is Julius Caesar. And once I was like, oh my God, he's doing he's not doing Julius Caesar in the sense that like this is a version of Julius Caesar, but we are meant to understand it in the same way that we are meant to understand Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is not a one-to-one sort of, it is there's kind of this level of historical fiction. I guess there's a couple of things. I think you can set interesting stories in history without them qualifying as historical fiction. And what I mean by that is there are movies that I would consider to be historical fiction that are about narrativizing something interesting and dramatic that actually happened in like a real way. And I'm sure I could think of, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I'm sure I could think of, like some good movies that are along this line that are about a piece of history that exists that was a real thing in the real world. Midway actually would be a great example. I talked about Midway, maybe like last year, something like that. Midway is a Roland Emmerich movie. It is remarkably accurate. And it is a true kind of minute by minute, point by point ensemble retelling of the Battle of Midway. And it follows a bunch of different characters. It follows Dick Best, the dive bomber who hit 2 of the Japanese carriers in the Battle of Midway. You are following the admiral in Japan, Admiral Yamamoto, who ends up walking into the American trap. You end up following the intelligence officer, who is the guy who deciphers the Japanese code around Midway by sort of circumstance, such that they can pull off their trap on the Japanese. And all of that stuff is essentially told one-to-one. There are some aspects of it that are narrativized in sort of like, that are kind of like more glorified. And there are some aspects that are played up and played down in order to make it a better kind of like movie. But somebody would walk out of the movie Midway with a quite accurate understanding of what happened over the course of, the first 6 months of 1942, whatever, Pearl Harbor to Midway kind of thing. You would have a pretty good understanding of kind of all pieces of that movie. This is what I would consider to be historical fiction. Then I would say that there is this level of historical fiction that I don't quite know how to put into words, which is like you're kind of more aligned with the spirit than the actuality. And it's sort of so ridiculous that no one ought to come away with. I made this argument before, but in different terms, that nobody ought to come away with an understanding that this is how history played out. The prime example here being 300. This is kind of my argument for 300. Everybody really hates 300 because it's not historically accurate. And it's like, how the fuck does somebody see rhino riders and mutant handless executioners? And it's like,
Yeah,
it's
it
so
feels like
ridiculous.
it's mad at being mad at, like, the Iliad for not being an accurate representation of the Trojan War, right? Like,
yes, yeah. This is exactly it. And that's what I think Julius Caesar is in terms of a Shakespeare play. And that's what I think Gladiator is, right? Like, nobody, like, there's a lot that is true and kind of accurate to the world, and it's a real representation of things. The Praetorians, for instance, I think are very accurately kind of represented based on the history that I have recently looked into when it comes to sort of how the Praetorian Guard as the emperor's sort of secret police and personal army that are inside of sort of like Rome itself, and they're a major power broker, right? Or the interactions between consuls and Caesars and all of the rest of this. Like, there's plenty of accurate sort of stuff, but nobody watches Gladiator II and is like, they put sharks in the Colosseum. Like, I just kind of can't believe that someone would actually think that's real, because it's so fucking ridiculous. Like, what did they do? First of all, I like, to play this sort of devil's advocate version of it, Rome is not a city on the ocean. So the water that they flooded the Colosseum with was not from the fucking ocean. It was not salt water. It was fresh water from the river, from the Tiber River, that it is built on, because Rome is built on a river. It's famously built on these 7 hills, right? And, there's no way that they would have had salt water to put sharks in. But also, how do the Romans transport sharks? Like, let's say by some miracle they bring salt water up into the Colosseum. How do they get the sharks there? It's just like, and it's like, it's not even that they couldn't have found a better example of this, because number one, gladiatorial games did feature crocodiles, Nile crocodiles from Egypt. And number two, those are freshwater animals, which would have been, we did know that the Colosseum allegedly flooded. It's the history is actually kind of unclear about whether or not they flooded the Colosseum, but you understand, it's cool. Everybody always says this is a great like tidbit for social studies in the 4th grade, that they actually and had these battles and all the rest kind of thing. You could have had crocodiles there for fair enough. But I actually would sort of say that just like, there's no such thing as a fucking gladiator who rides a rhino. You can't domesticate rhinos. They would never have been able to saddle this creature. What on earth? That's ridiculous, right? And once you get to sort of that threshold in my mind, I'm willing to forgive quite a lot about it not being historically accurate. The problem is that it spiritually has to be accurate. Do you know what I mean? Julius Caesar is not point by point accurate to the history of Julius Caesar's assassination, right? But it is spiritually accurate to kind of the vibe of that era of Rome, right? The fall of the Roman Republic and the birth of the true empire, right? To Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, right? Like, these are who the different characters are, what their thought process is. What Mark Antony is thinking when he says friends, Romans, countrymen, years, that whole speech, all the rest of it kind of thing. And I do think Gladiator 2 fails on that sort of level, because again, this is not an empire in decline. This is an empire at the height of power. It'll continue to be quite powerful for at least another 150 years. Most people sort of cite the splitting of the empire into East and West and Constantinople, which happens under the Emperor Constantine in the 300s or something like that. So 100 years after sort of like this point. And so I feel like that's the part where it kind of like misses. It doesn't actually describe spiritually where Rome was at. It's just kind of inheriting some of that stuff, because the original movie is set with Marcus Aurelius, right? The great philosopher emperor, right? And Commodus, the gladiator emperor, as these two kind of like main pillars.
Yeah, I don't know if I 100% agree with your full thing there. Like I get this distinction that you're making. I think it's valid. I get the thing that you're pointing at with like the 300. I think there's like a level of separation that like actually I don't know if I'm on board with you, like this the spiritual vibes thing, right? Like, you know,
Okay.
because like again, I think I could have lived with the kind of like, you know, and you know, in you know Ridley Scott's abbreviated Roman history, right? Like, you know, the decline happens in like 10 years so that we can like, you know, have, you know, throughput with the same characters. I think there's a level of consistency is the wrong word, but like, you know, level setting maybe is the idea, right? Like, you know, the whole of 300 is like steeped in this like mythological kind of lens, right? Like it feels like you're telling the Greek myth version of the Battle of 300, and that's all throughout the film. I feel like it's hard to like hit something that's a little bit more middle ground. Like I think Gladiator 1 does it pretty well, right? Like I'm sure there's a bunch of historical inaccuracies beyond, you know, kind of like the obvious factual stuff, right? Like Commodus did not strangle Marcus Aurelius. But like, if you told me there were never tigers in the arena because like, you know, they were in a, you know, they're like native to somewhere that's not close enough for them to get the arena, I'd believe that and it wouldn't bother me, right? Like, you know, because it's like, it's reasonable, right? I feel like I could have been that way about the sharks too, and the rhino. Like the rhinoceros, definitely. The sharks. The sharks are kind of like on that tipping point piece, right? Like, it's like, what would it be like? It would be like if in the middle of the Lord of the Rings, like you know, Luke Skywalker showed up and like slashed Sauron in half with his, you know, lightsaber, right? It's like, even though the whole thing's fantastical, like that's just way too much of a break from what has happened without like some further world building to excuse it, right? Like, and so I don't know if I'm totally on board with your description there, but I think that Gladiator. I don't know if I think that Gladiator 2 would have flipped over that line for me. Like it's
part of
close.
it is that I'm willing also to give quite a lot of credit for the way it used its sort of historical inaccuracies. For instance, the one thing about the rhino that I really enjoyed that it wasn't just like an inconsequential detail. Do you know what I mean? It's not like they just put the rhino in there because it looks cool. It was actually in service to this important character moment, which is that Lucius, you know, whatever Hanor, he's Hanor at the time, he's Lucius later kind of thing, uses the rhino's blind charge against it by throwing the dust in the, you know, like by throwing the dust in the air. And also, that's the moment when Lucilla like really puts together that, oh, he quoted Virgil, which was on his like childhood bedroom or whatever, and he did this thing that we all saw Maximus do, this important gesture where, you know, Maximus grounds himself by rubbing, you know, sort of the dirt in his hands kind of thing. And so it is a moment that serves both to strengthen his character in the sense that he's smart. He's not just an idiot. He has this rage and this anger, but like he's a tactician and he's able to outsmart his opponents. That's cool. That's something that Maximus does in Gladiator 1. And I would actually say that it's better in this movie than the way that Maximus does, even though I do quite like Maximus's sort of rallying of the gladiators in, you know, in kind of the first movie. And it also furthers the plot because it's this important character moment where Lucilla realizes that her son is alive and fighting in the arena, right? And so all of that together, I actually think makes it quite elegant in the way that they chose that. Yes, this guy is charging on a fucking rhinoceros, even though that's completely ridiculous because it's used to set up all of this extra stuff in a pretty tight, complete package, which is I'll always respect filmmaking on that level. And the same thing happens with the ships, you know, the way that he maneuvers his ship to break the oars. You know, they are, I think they're the ship against the Persian ship. So they're the Greeks, they're the Persians. The Persians are supposed to win that battle. But that's my expectation, right? But he outsmarts them. He destroys the oars on on the other half of the ship, and is like coaching his guys in order to, in order to pull properly, even though they're behind and they're meant to lose this fight, just like Maximus did against the Battle of No, I actually don't think, but it's a Punic, one of the battles of the Punic, the chariots. Maximus and his crew are able to kill the charioteers because they outsmart them and they stand together and they make that little turtle formation, stuff like that. And so both of those moments, I actually just like, yeah, oh, you add sharks to the water so that it sort of signals when somebody falls in the water. Cool. I don't give a shit, because like really the point is that Lucius is not just a skillful gladiator singularly. He shows that against the Rhino, but that he is also a leader of these guys. And they are following him and his, sort of whatever. And he does this clever thing that you don't think of, where, he destroys half of the oars so that he can hold their boat steady, and then comes around and does that like ramming move. That's cool. That's sweet. And so all of that stuff kind of together is part of what carries it for me on that level.
So I'm going to say that I thought him dusting his hands was bad. Again, like this was because like he is at best the fruit of Maximus's loins. He never trained with Maximus. He saw him fight like once, right?
Yeah,
like,
but you can imagine that had an important thing. I loved it. The poster for the movie.
He is still in rejection of, like, first of all, he doesn't know that Maximus is his father yet. And two, he's still in kind of like a rejection, like, in rage mode at that point, right? Like, he's not, he is not his father's son at that point.
Man, that's interesting. I feel like he's not his mother's son at that, but he is a gladiator, and he doesn't need to know that. Obviously, in the first movie, Lucius is enamored with him and goes and talks to him specifically, and all of the rest of it says, "This is Argento, this is the other," like the horses or whatever. That stuff is great. I love all that. When when we were walking to the movie, saw the poster, it doesn't even show his face. It's just him kneeling down, getting the thing. I told Rachel, who's never seen, I was like, "Oh, that's such a great poster," because it's such like an iconic thing that Max does in that, in that first movie. So I love everything about it.
I mean, to me, it felt like that's the thing a Maximus did, like, level moment, right? Like, I recognized it, right? Like,
yeah, see, this feels like this is the sweater thread pulling. Do you know what I mean? This is the kind of thing that's a little ambiguous, and whether or not bad faith is sort of the wrong word for it, but like whether or not you take it in good faith or bad faith kind of depends.
Yeah.
How much you're willing to sort of like give the movie. And part of this is that like the thing that I really connected to, and that I really this one, is that it's actually telling a much more complex story in terms of sort of where it's going, what the plot threads are, who's the good guys and bad guys. Like obviously the emperors are the bad guys, but like they're not the villains, and you sense that from the beginning. But like all of this is built around Pedro Pascal's general, not Aurelius. It's like,
I mean, what it's actually built around is Denzel Washington's machinations, right? Like that's like the meta plot.
But you also don't even know that he's a bad guy until halfway through the movie or something kind of along. It's like he has this big betrayal moment for Aurelius kind of at the end of the second act, right? And I loved all that stuff, right? This is what makes it so good in Shakespeare. Watching Lucius, who fucking hates this Roman general who conquered Numidia, which by the way was absolutely just a Roman territory at that time. I don't think they conquered it. I'm pretty sure they conquered it before the birth of Christ, actually. And being so dedicated and wanting the vengeance against it. And that guy secretly working on his behalf, married to his mom, right? Wanting to return Rome to the dream of his grandfather, right? It's just like the dramatic irony of that. That's pure Shakespeare, right? And then the fact that he wants it so bad, and when he finally gets the opportunity, he actually realizes, oh my God, I thought I wanted this, but I don't. Like, this is pure, like, that is the recipe. The moment that I understood where it was headed, which was pretty early on, because I turned to Rachel and I said, he is, I didn't remember the name Lucius at the time, but I was like, he is Lucilla's son from the first movie. You know, that's the plot twist here. He's actually like the rightful heir, kind of. I was set for the rest of the movie. I loved everything about it because I just knew that it would be so emotional and full of so much dramatic tension when the two of them actually got to see each other in the arena.
See, I wonder if I would have liked it better if I didn't know that that was the premise, right? Like that's like the back of the box description, right? Is that like, you know, he is, you know, Lucius Maximus's son, right? Like that was like the one sentence description on IMDb when, you know, like I believe so, right? Like, you know, that like that.
Oh, interesting.
So it wasn't.
I felt very smart because I put it together immediately. I didn't actually know. I watched one trailer for this, but I don't actually remember anything about it. I only remember the boats and the rhino.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. And like that, I think, you know, to your point, part of this primed me to dislike it in the beginning was because, like, you know, I watched Gladiator, was like, how the fuck do they make a sequel to this? And like,
yeah,
look at the one, you know, the IMDb thing, and it's like, he's his son. That's like that's like undermines this, you know, the entire like first movie, right? And like, you know, so I was, you know,
yeah, I feel that. I also think part of it is a little nuanced because this does a thing that I would normally. In fact, I was famously mad about it when it came to Star Wars, right? Which is that it sort of undoes the first one, right?
Sure.
It sort of resets the status quo to be bullshit again because you need your hero to solve a new problem. I totally understand that. I totally get that. But the reason I kind of forgave it is because Gladiator is not a movie, frankly, it's about its world building or its lore. Do you know what I mean? I am mad about the lore of Star Wars being kind of messed with because it has all of these knock-on effects that just bug the shit out of me, right? I love Star Wars. I love the story of Anakin Skywalker, his rise, his fall, his redemption, all the rest of that, right? But it's not just that returning Palpatine to life kind of like undoes Anakin's character stuff. Because like at the end of the day, I kind of don't care so much on that level. But it undoes quite a lot of the other stuff, which is also part of what I didn't like about The Force Awakens, right? It resets the universe to the status quo that, yes, the Empire is defeated, but now there's another Empire, and they have a Death Planet instead of a Death Star. Like, this is so lame. Do you know what I mean? And that's all happening on kind of the level of world building or setting, we might say.
Sure.
Which is that it's causing a ton of damage to the setting that these movies are sort of set in. I am not anywhere close to connected to the setting of the Gladiator movie. It's not a wider franchise. You know, like, yes, it sucks that Maximus's great sacrifice was kind of for nothing, and Rome was just as much of a decadent sort of like hellhole and all the rest of it. But it's like, I don't get the feeling that it undermines the movie because the first movie that setting kind of level.
So I don't care about the stuff about the Empire. I care about it undermining Maximus as a character, right? Like him being able to go to his rest with his wife and his child, I think is undermined by him having another child, right? Like
yeah, okay.
And that is the thing, the primary thing that bothered me there. And again, like I said, like the specifics of the Dream of Rome, like, you know, of the Roman Empire don't bother me so much, but like the theming of, like, you know, returning it to the Republic, I think is undermined by Lucius being his son, right? Like, it's gonna get awkward in that afterlife. Yes. Yeah. You know, and you know, I don't think there's like, I also think like the end just wasn't as good, right? Like I think the fight between Denzel and Lucius is worse than the fight between Commodus and Maximus.
Yeah, I liked sort of the surprise of it in a way, and I kind of wish they lampshaded that a little bit more. The twist in the third act, sort of being that whatever, I think it's like Marcinius or something like that. God, it's gonna book guy's what fucking emperor? Because he was an emperor for like a year or something.
Oh, Denzel's character.
Who does Denzel play? Macrinus. Yeah, Macrinus was like an emperor for like who never went to famously did not step foot in Rome. I wrote that. I like wrote that in the description just because I happen to know the detail kind of thing. But the idea that Macrinus is was secretly one of Marcus Aurelius' slaves, and his whole goal is to just like engineer the fall of Rome because he just fucking hates Marcus Aurelius for enslaving him. And I was like, oh, this is neat. That's cool. He quotes Marcus Aurelius, right? The greatest vengeance is to be, completely unlike the one who did the injury or something like that. And he's completely unlike sort of noble philosopher Marcus Aurelius and is instead this, I don't know, whatever, big bad guy. But the idea that actually at the end of the movie, he's been doing all these political machinations, but he can actually fight too, and he's going to 1v1, and he's going to 1v1 Hanor was pretty sweet. And, but it was kind of just like over pretty immediately. And I was a little disappointed. Yeah. I was a little disappointed by that. But I think part of that is that like, I actually think I might like the combat, like the fights in Gladiator 2 better than in Gladiator 1. I don't know. I would have to really watch Gladiator 1 again. There's the one where Maximus has the tiger and the tiger jumps on his back. That part's sweet. They do the thing with the
I thought the monkeys in this movie were terrible. Like, I'm not saying that like
the first one.
Yeah. Like the actual like CG on the monkeys was just like god awful. And the and him like like that doesn't like ruin the entire movie for me, but that was just the thing that like stuck out of me as like being like absolutely dog shit. That bothered me.
Yeah, it's really what I liked is sort of the give and take, the like even with whatever that guy's name is, Arcelius or whatever. I'm never fucking remember the general that Pedro Pascal's, right? Like all of these fights had a lot of like drama and weight to them, whereas the fights in the original Gladiator, like they carried a little less of that, because they kind of happen and are part of Maximus's rise to power, and he is demonstrating kind of these character traits, like when they win that Punic Wars fight that they're supposed to lose because Maximus drills them to stay together because he is a general commander. He understands that with spears and shields they're going to be able to beat these charioteers. All that stuff is super cool, right? But like when Hanor does that, but it's the ships or the rhino, I thought it was also just like great and fun. And like the way that he 1v1s that, he 1v1s the rhino guy is just like well choreographed, and they're just like fun, pretty gripping fights. I probably agree with you that I actually maybe the weakest part of this whole movie. I feel like you maybe could have ended it, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like when he like is fighting all the Praetorians and he gets all of his freed gladiator buds to come out. That part was sweet.
Yeah. That's that also happens in the first movie, right? Like, that's the big escape, even though it doesn't quite work.
I love that in the first movie. This is one of the things that I think makes Quintus, his friend, or not, no, it's not Quintus, it's Cicero. Tommy Flanagan, that Irish guy who has the crazy scar on his face, gets hanged because like their plot gets uncovered or whatever, and Maximus has that 1v1 with the man. All hope is truly fucking. That shit is amazing. I love that. I love everything about that, which I actually think is a little bit different than in the script. In the script, I don't believe Maximus died in the original Gladiator. They changed that to make it so that he dies, which obviously I like way fucking more. And I liked that Lucius didn't die in this one because he kind of is seeking death the whole movie. And anytime a character has a death wish, you always want them to live, kind of counterintuitively. But I also kind of wish Lucius died. I think that would have been sweet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is part of why it felt like a retread to me. Is like, you mean the thing that will solve the plot by breaking the hero out of prison? Like the plan to break the hero out of prison, and solve the plot doesn't, like, they get caught out is a good surprise in the first movie. It is like, oh, it's happening again in the second movie, right? Like, and again, maybe I just saw it too close back to back.
The thing that was surprising about it then is you're not quite sure where Macronus is at that point. You know, he's playing a lot of different angles and he's vaguely sort of sinister, but like he's putting things together at the same time that Lucilla's putting things together and they're having interactions. And you're like, maybe they could be on the same team kind of thing, right? Like maybe they're all working together. He clearly has all the contempt for fucking emperors, right? He goes on to murder basically both of them. But yeah, like so anyway, that betrayal did kind of come at it from the other side for me, which I thought was interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just from like a meta narrative point. It felt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the chat, Rachel
Does
says,
this movie make a lot of money? Oh, I'm sorry. What's up?
She says, I felt like his emotional turn in the middle was weak, to be honest. Fuck you, fuck my mom, fuck everybody, fuck the general, fuck Rome, Pedro Pascal, sad big eyes, Puss in Boots face. Okay, I'm not mad anymore, right? Like,
pretty good. Sad big eyes, Puss in Boots face is a pretty good one. I actually was hoping that he was going to kill. That is maybe one thing I would have changed. I would have had him just fucking kill Pedro Pascal's character. Because, like, you know, whether or not Pedro Pascal wanted to be there, you know, taking Numidia or whatever, he, like, did materially lead to the murder. This is a little bit of what I mean by, like, hugboxy bullshit that pisses me off in kind of modern storytelling. We had an unpopular opinion thread in our work chat, you know, like a little casual chat this morning, and my unpopular opinion was writers going to therapy has made the quality of movies, television shows, and games worse, right? And I think this is actually a pretty good representation of that. He should have fucking killed him, even though Pedro Pascal is demonstrably working to save him and his life and help his mother. He should have just been so consumed with vengeance and rage and the rest of it and just fucking murdered that guy. I think that would have been better because it's kind of more brutal. They don't like work out. And also it would help in a stakes way because like the thing that Macron is, he has this rage. But like once he actually does the thing and he gets the hollowness of vengeance, I feel like the back half of the movie would fall together perfectly. But
I think I disagree with you. First of all, I don't think this is particularly hugboxy. I think like, the kind of like, realizes that his enemy is actually noble, right? Like, and so will not kill him, I think is, I think that's perfect. Like that is a thing that I think is like perfectly appropriate for the movie, right?
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. Plus there is also, he just fucking hates his mom, which I really love. He and his mom do not talk it out. He says, go fuck yourself. You know what I mean?
Except he doesn't follow through on that. Like, like 15 minutes later, he's like, I don't want to lose you again.
I mean, sure, he's going to come around on this shit in the first, no matter what, right? But like, he definitely does not talk through his problems with her or whatever.
Yeah, right. He just kind of is like, well, I found you again. Boo, 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 boo. And then Macron just shoots her with the crossbow, right? Like,
Yep. He actually shoots her with the short bow. Okay.
Oh, was it? Sorry. Yeah, I guess
crossbows weren't invented until the Middle Ages, Mango.
Well,
it actually be inaccurate for there to be crossbows in this movie.
Wasn't
which famously cares so much about?
Wasn't there a crossbow? Didn't he almost shoot Pedro with the crossbow thing?
Is there a crossbow?
So
that would be so funny because that would be his.
No,
I mean, there was a trebuchet in this movie that doesn't get invented in 1,000 years.
So on the boat, right? Like when the boat's coming around, he goes to shoot Pedro in the stands, right? Like I'm pretty sure that was a crossbow. He takes it from one of the. It might have been like technically a mounted ballista or something, but he like lining up. I'm pretty sure it was a crossbow. He was lining up the shot and like barely avoids killing him.
Maybe.
Yeah. Rachel's saying it was a crossbow. So.
When was the crossbow invented? Oh, never. Wow, Jesus. Well, it was apparently in China for quite a long time in the 4th century BC.
Because I know that like ballistae were like a thing, right? Like that. Yeah, Yeah, it says that there were crossbows.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
Yeah,
Well,
it might also be like uh somebody on Ask Historians is saying is it's like uh there's no there's no definitive answer. Uh
apparently there were Greek crossbows in ancient Greece, and it looks like the 4th century in Rome there were crossbows. So it looks like crossbows were theoretically kind of historically accurate. Good for them.
I mean, I'm honestly still bothered by the fact that someone shot an arrow straight through his wife's chest armor. Um, I don't.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like. I feel like that's not that unreasonable, right? Like that's like kind of the big thing about crossbows and later firearms is that they can pierce. They have enough like force to pierce things, right? Like uh pierce armor, right, in a way that's that kind of like obviates them, whereas they still can deflect blades because you can't get enough uh essentially a force behind the point fast enough to pierce in the middle of a battle. But yeah, yeah. I don't know. What else do you want to talk about with this movie?
I don't know. I said my piece. It's Shakespeare. Okay. That's all I really wanted to get at. I will say that I thought the directing in this movie was also particularly good. There was a lot of camera movement that was a little refreshing. It actually reminds me quite a lot of Furiosa, the other movie we were thinking about doing for today, where just on a raw camera level, I was really connected with it because I just felt like there was a lot of really dynamic shots and movement. There was this one that they were doing a lot of, which was like sweeping camera through their sort of lavish sets, which I loved because you could tell that a lot of this stuff was really kind of like handcrafted, and ironically not all that CG. And so they were using these where somebody would enter a room and it would be focused on them, but as the person crosses the room, the camera follows the actor, but it has this benefit of kind of giving you this sweeping sense of geography. Love that stuff. So that was the other thing that that I thought was medium significant. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
Gladiator 2.
Yeah, awesome.
What else came out this year?
Vamp for just 1 minute while
okay,
because we're gonna move into our weeks. So
I'm trying to think about what else came out this year. That's in because we're obviously we're getting close to the Derpies, and I'm gonna have to have a favorite movie for the Derpies, but I don't remember. I just feel like I don't remember what movies I've seen this year because 2024 was, I don't know. It was a real interesting. I mean, obviously 2023 for me was Dune, but like, what are some of the big movies that came out this year? I don't even know. Oh my God, the second Joker movie. I did not watch that, but we really ought to give that one a shot. What else came out this year?
I have returned.
Welcome back. Is everything okay?
Yeah, no, I wanted to show I have completed version 2 of the 3D printed some Derps Play Games logo.
So you have the 3D printer?
Yes, yeah. I have
Okay.
I have a Bamboo P1S, which I got on Black Friday.
Is that a resin printer? Or
no, it's an FDM printer. Okay. It is, the FDM is just so much easier than the resin.
Yeah, we have a
resin printer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a resin printer.
Which one do you have?
I don't remember. We bought it a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But I'm excited to get a lot of use of it in fucking New Hampshire.
Yeah. So I have a crappy like cheap resin printer out in my garage that doesn't quite work. And I have like tons of problems with bed adhesion, and it doesn't really work in the winter because it's so cold.
Somebody really leaning into the word "we" here. Yeah, listen, okay, we got married. That means that I can take all the credit for your bullshit. Okay.
But yeah, no, it's super fun. I think I need to make the top layer on this a little bit thicker. It's got this like
What is your
roughness.
plan for like? How do you make stuff in Blender yourself?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes like I printed out some like Christmas ornament. Like my Christmas tree topper is printed out. Um,
Cute.
like I did this myself, right? Like I followed a tutorial on how to like turn like the image into a extrudable thing. Most of it I don't do. Like I might try and learn some more, and I think I'm gonna try and do a couple other projects like basically of this sort with it. Um, I don't have the talent to like model like like fantasy figurines or whatever. Um,
The best you could get is something like Hero Forge or something like that.
yeah, I mean or I bet you I could like figure out how to like slot things together
Mm-hmm.
to kind of sort of get it to work. But
Yeah, I mean, what do they call that in 40K? They call that a thing. Kit bashing, I think is what they call it. Where you are taking pieces from different pieces from different kits and putting them together because
yeah,
like they're all like unique or whatever, and you can pop them back together. I think, are you smiling because I just replaced my batteries? I assume.
no, I'm smiling because Rachel has asked if you could set up your resin printer in my garage, and you're more than welcome to if you want to drive an hour each way to use it.
Is that how far it is? Is that because we
like,
live where Josh lives?
Yeah, it's like 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah,
fair enough.
It's just but yeah, that's it's maybe like 40 minutes on a good day. I've actually never been to Josh's place, so I don't quite know, and but it's like 40 to 50 minutes to Ray and Saren's place. Yeah, the residence you sticking out in the apartment. Yeah, no, like that's part of why it's in my garage, because it's also like you're not supposed to bring that shit in, right?
Yep.
But I have a workstation set up for it in my I even have like a homemade like curing station with like a $7 UV light off of Amazon.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is this going to be your big break into Warhammer? Are you going to make a bunch of Warhammer figures?
Dude, I need
know
to
there's
just
like
like
a huge-
paint things, right? Like, I have I have so many minis that I have tubs of miniatures that
Really?
well, because I've done like 3 or 4 of the Reapers mix Kickstarters, right? So I'm just like, I just like need to convince myself to actually paint the things, right? Like I just bought so over Black Friday, Steamforged, which does a bunch of board games, and War Machine, they had like this sale. I was like, oh, I'll go look. Like all of their Dark Souls board game miniatures were like 90% off, and so I got like $50 of like Dark Souls miniatures. I'm like, these are so cool, and like they're sitting there, they're still in the bubble wrap. I'm gonna paint them maybe in 30 years, right? Like
yeah, I have no plans to paint anything. I have lots of plans to make Rachel paint things for me. This weekend I took the car to I took the car to the auto shop to like check it before we do our big drive kind of thing. And the guy was like, oh, well, it's going to take 60 minutes to, 90 minutes or something like that. So it's like, okay. And I happen to know that there's a Warhammer store that is just called Warhammer that was half a mile up the road. So I went to that store, which seemed to be run by just a guy. He frankly seemed like the kind of guy who worked as an overpaid software engineer or like somebody who cashed out of his startup, and he just made a shop for Warhammer, because I have seen Warhammer in shops before, but Warhammer is always subsidized by other shit. You know what I mean? It is always a toy store, but the owner really loves Warhammer, and so he has his whole section kind of like in the back, but like really the things that sells here is toys to kids. Like moms come in and buy toys, right? Or it'll be like a hobby shop and somebody has all the fucking model trains or whatever, but he doesn't care about the model trains, he cares about the Warhammer, right? And this guy, is the whole shop, it was just Warhammer, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. But I'm very obviously into the old world, the Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but it's set like 600 years earlier or something like that. It's set way earlier, basically. And they're coming out with army lists, and they just did, I think, the Chaos Warriors army list. And I'm just like, man, when Wood Elves come out, I'm going to just ridiculous amount of money buying those fucking figures and getting a proper Wood Elf army up and running.
I was gonna so I know that there is free to play game system that's based on printing your own miniatures, and that seemed interesting to me. And it's supposed to be like, you know, like a couple like mix and match rules, whatever you can play. Like it's kind of like they have like themes for the models. I also think that Steam Forge has some really cool looking model. Like I would play War Machine. They've got like a pirate faction with like crabs that I think looks really cool. I haven't played much of any of these games though, so I'd be interested in giving it a shot. We could also, you know, like this is a thing. I have painted miniatures with local friends, right? Like that's a thing that could be done. I bought
Yeah,
like
I also love the idea of using like miniatures, obviously for D&D stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's always the best part, right? Like when we finished our 8-year running campaign over the summer, the DM is like, you know, you could tell he's like, oh boy, I get to bring all my toys out, right? Like, you know, it's like, you know, every time we would like go walk through his like suitcase to go pull something, we're like, oh no, what the hell is he pulling out now, right? Like, I had some really cool models, and he had like we fought a black dragon that like the gimmick of the fight was like every time we got it to like it was like the plane shifted memory of a ancient black dragon, and every time we got it to half health, it would like go up in size. So it was like the young version, and we like got it to half health, and it just like popped into like the large version. He had like 3 different models for it. It was so cool.
That is so cool. Yeah, that's one of the reasons, honestly, why I lean so hard on stuff for my custom campaign setting, because I really love the idea of like Beastmen, for instance, featured in House Rebels. They're featuring right now in 7th Expedition, right? I could go buy a Beastman, you know, I could go buy Beastman figures, right? And it's like, oh, here is a Beastman Minotaur, here's a Beastman Cygor, here are Beastman, you know, Kazrak One Eye has a miniature I could like buy on or something like that. Obviously, that campaign is all digital and everything else, so you know it doesn't actually sort of like translate that way. But I certainly love the idea of being able to sort of go to these kind of like ready-made models for some of these things, to use them for whatever, right? Like there's a whole thing with the Necro Sphinx, you know, that they encountered in 7th Expedition, which is a real like Warhammer unit. Obviously, it would cost me zillion fucking dollars, and I probably wouldn't buy a whole Necro Sphinx for one set piece moment. It wasn't even like a fight or anything like that. It's they activated the Necro Sphinx so it could kill the Jabberslythe, which is, you know, one of those is a big monster unit for the Tomb Kings, the other one's a big monster unit for the Beastmen kind of thing. And it's like a great cool set piece moment, but like, you know, in a world where I have infinite money, a sweet pulling out the sweet fully painted boom Necrosphinx kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. That sounds awesome.
I'm honestly thinking so much about D&D stuff these days because part of it is that I have just been listening to a lot of history stuff. I was talking a little bit before the cast about the Rest is History podcast, which is basically the best podcast ever. Okay, it is kind of comically, it honestly feels like I'm listening to like a cartoon caricature of what a podcast like this. It's 2 guys in like their 50s and 60s. They are old British historians. One of them is very slim with like sharp features. The other one is very round. He's bald. He has this big round nose and like these round glasses. And they are just British, and they are talking to each other about, you know, history. And the whole thing of the podcast is that, you know, they'll do a podcast on like a podcast episode on a topic, and one of them will read out sort of will sort of tell them in a narrative way what the history of this topic is, right? So one of the episodes on the French Revolution, they did one on Burnett. And so the guy's sitting there and kind of telling the life story to the other guy. And the other guy asks these kind of probing questions, you know, has these little anecdotes, right? It's just like really fun.
Oh, it's the other Tom Holland. I'm familiar with the other Tom Holland.
Oh, why are you familiar with the other Tom Holland?
He, I think, has been on in a historical what's it called? He's been on other podcasts that I listen to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He absolutely is like that. Yeah. The funny thing is that I bought the audiobook for PAX. So, which I think I mentioned on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. PAX being, you know, this audiobook about the golden era of Rome, right? How Edward Gibbons in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in the 18th century basically said that the 2nd century AD was the best, that the world is the most prosperous in, where the most people had the most amount of prosperity basically in their in kind of like their lives. And so Pax is a book that is, sort of going over whether or not, like, analyzing that claim, figuring out whether or not it's true. But the thing that's amazing about that was crazy about this is Pax is written by Tom Holland, and I started listening to this podcast for I think completely different reasons, because I was watching other like history YouTubers basically, and it just kind of started popping up into my rec. And they kept referencing Tom Holland, and I thought they were referencing. I was like, "Oh, I understand. They're historians referencing this other prominent historian." But no, they were just sort of like talking about him in the person. And I was like, "Oh my god, this is the author for that book I just bought." Which was very cool. But they have these like there was this one bit that Rachel and I listened to that was so fucking funny. They're talking about Admiral Nelson. Lord Horatio Nelson, very famous admiral in the Napoleonic Wars, right? He is sort of Britain's Napoleon, but on the waves, right? Who outsmarts all of Napoleon's naval command and has these huge victories in the Battle of the Nile, Trafalgar. Listening to this episode, and they're talking about how he had to stop in Naples and meet with the English ambassador to Naples, or the English attaché to Naples. And they were like, "Oh, and the English ambassador and the very boring English ambassador and his very interesting young." And Tom, goes, "Oh, I gather you don't quite like his wife, Dominic." And Dominic goes, "Well, yeah, I wouldn't say that." And then Tom goes, "You have written here strumpet." And it was just so funny that they had this like little bit between themselves. They have a whole thing about Lafayette, the French Revolutionary War general who eventually returns to France. He plays a part in the French Revolution. In their French Revolution cast, they keep referencing Lafayette, and Tom really likes Lafayette. He thinks Lafayette is colorful, roguish figure, has a lot of panache, and and stuff like that. And every time Dominic brings up Lafayette, he references how one prominent historian for the French Revolution calls Lafayette, a political dullard, or like a true dullard who was politically inconsequential. And so it's just kind of like needling him. They have these, and it's just like, I love all. But anyway, I've been listening to a lot of this because I've kind of learned that a lot of how I think about D&D campaigns is through the lens of history, right? When I didn't think about it in these terms necessarily, but Hell's Rebels was essentially fantasy, the French Revolution, right? Seventh Expedition is fantasy, Lewis and Clark. Kovalgrad is fantasy, Stalingrad, obviously the most direct of all, right? And so I just feel like listening, I don't know. There's a lot of inspiration to from this level of history stuff. Right now, the Nelson stuff has made me kind of obsessed with Napoleonic era stuff. Napoleon is just pretty interesting, and he's weirdly a part of history that, like, I have a lot of knowledge about World War II. I was really interested in kind of like World War II, the Civil War. I read a bunch of books about this as a kid, but I always kind of like dodged Napoleon. And to be fair, to be like frank, I don't even think I know. Like, I don't know what made Napoleon so special besides the fact that he is so special. You know what I mean? I couldn't articulate to you in the same way that I could articulate it about like Rommel or something. What made this guy such a transcendent master strategist or tactician?
Yeah, there was a period of time where I was actually fairly into Napoleonic Wars, but I don't know if I could tell you what about his tactics in particular were so dominant. I think part of it was that, like, he rewarded merit over kind of like station, if I remember correctly. And that goes a long way, right? Like,
I also have a feeling it's something about the independence of generals, and because he's the one who comes up with the idea of, if I remember correctly, that you split your army into sort of small sub armies that are kind of this is what happened maybe I do understand this. Because this is Austerlitz, right? Austerlitz is the Austrians have this gigantic, huge army, but it's very unwieldy because the commander is kind of holding up the power, and there's not good ways to disseminate orders to 50,000, troops or whatever the number is. Whereas Napoleon had delegated quite effectively a number of, you know, sort of like talented generals in his corps, and because the generals have that level of autonomy, smaller number of troops, they're able
And
to
I think
be
it rolls up
victorious
from
or
there too,
something.
right? Like part of the reason that he was able to effectively delegate to the generals is because he trusted them to be competent as opposed to be like, you know, rich people, you know, like aristocrats, right? That like
Yeah.
had the station by dint of, you know,
Yeah,
their station.
because that's also something you see in the Civil War specifically, you know, is these kind of corps. Well, like Robert E. Lee controls all of the army of Northern Virginia. Yeah, the army of Northern Virginia, but he has Stonewall Jackson, you know, holds the right flank. He has Longstreet, you know, who does fucking whatever. There's always these kind of like sub generals who are commanding specific kind of fronts, or the rear guard or the vanguard.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is a historical period that's like ripe for a D&D? What do you want to play D&D historical thing?
I don't want to say my top one because I've got an idea for a campaign in it.
Oh my god.
But what would I want
So
to?
honestly, like a good podcast episode. Like you could make a whole podcast episode about this question.
Yeah, I mean, like part of it is like, you know, there's a lot of like stuff that you could do like that's like kind of like on point. Part of it too is that like I think that wars are tough because D&D isn't actually about kind of like that level of combat, right? It's about small interparty conflict, which well, you can get some of the theming out of that kind of stuff, right? Like, you know, you wouldn't want to do the Battle of Waterloo on the tabletop because like it's not about like, you know, the hero characters, right? Like you want like, you know, there's a reason that like Arthurian legend is a lot of like, you know, of these particular knights of fighting each other, which is kind of like the big inspiration. So I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to do a particular.
I kind of like the idea of like war as a setting.
Okay.
This is something I pitched to Rachel yesterday. Was, you know, this Nelson stuff has me about sort of naval. I like the idea of. I feel like if I were to tell you we're gonna do a naval D&D campaign, you're always gonna think pirates, because it's the obvious answer, right? Oh, pirates, sure. It's super evocative. Everybody loves pirates. There's always some whatever a historical support for pirate for, you know, most D&D is set in like the 12th century, except for set in the 17th century because there are pirates, right? Like, you know, but I really like the idea of, you know, like the Admiralty, and not doing something about kind of like the Caribbean, but doing something about the Mediterranean. The idea that there are these huge ships of the line who are engaging in warfare all through sort of like a small condensed sort of ocean environment where anybody is just days, you know, like a day's sail. But there's also good reasons for people to get off of ships and do stuff like that. I feel like you could do a lot of campaign.
Yeah, I mean, if you could also do like
stuff.
there's a lot there. Like, you know, you could do privateers, which, you know, is kind of sort of pirates, but like, you know, it's like a halfway point, right? Like you could do,
or you could even just do something like you have a trading vessel that is moving throughout the Mediterranean while the Napoleonic Wars are going, right? And it's kind of this backdrop sort of thing. So you have fantasy Napoleon, two massive powers who are vying for control of this, and you have your little trading schooner, and you're trying to get from, you know, fantasy Naples to fantasy Genoa to fantasy Barcelona or something like that.
yeah, no, I mean that's actually, you know, like, you know, war profiteers, right? That have to like, you know, hold off. That'd be cool. I'm surprised you haven't gone for like some Doomboat scenario, right? Like, you know, like, you know, like the Northwest Passage, but like, you know, for
I do. Oh, I have had in for a long time the Northwest, the D&D version of the Northwest Passage. Basically, ever since I got obsessed with the fucking Terror, that TV show, like however had D&D Northwest Passages. Actually, I mean, to be fair, a little bit of that is Seventh Expedition way, because Passage and Seventh Expedition are kind of two sides of the same.
Yeah,
you know, two sides of the same coin. The whole thing with Seventh Expedition is it's a little less Lewis and Clark, because like Lewis and Clark, you know, we understood the California coast, right? You know, like Lewis and Clark is the adventurous version of it, but truly the Northwest Passage is kind of what right? Like in the lore of Seventh Expedition, the reason you're the Seventh Expedition is because the previous 6 have all failed and died, and that's why this continent is cursed. The cursed continent of Kaya. And I think all of that adds stakes and drama. And I'm lifting this passage that and actually hard in these sorts of things, right?
Yeah. 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 What else to talk about weeks? I finished Veilguard. After like 80 some odd hours of play, I think. I don't know how I feel about it still. Like, it stopped being challenging after like that fight I told you about where I fought the last optional boss 15 levels early. That was like the last hard thing I did in the game. Everything else was kind of like a matter of cleaning up stuffing, pushing stuff through. Have you played any more of it?
Mm-hmm. I played a lot more of it. I got to the point with the 2 cities
Okay.
that you had mentioned, which I won't get too deep in for spoilers. I have not recruited the full.
Okay.
But I'm 6 out of 8 or something like that. 5 out of 7. I don't
Okay, so you're missing probably Tosh and what is it, Emmerich? Do you have Emmerich?
Yeah, so Emmerich is the necromancer everybody talks about. Tosh is the dragon hunter. I'm on that quest now.
Okay.
I haven't actually like gotten to that point, but that's as far through sort of the game. To be fair, I like it a lot. My complaint about this hugboxy bullshit is worse. You obviously told me to expect it worse, but man, it's worse than I expected. But there's a weird upside to it that I do sort of appreciate, which is when the team is all together and they're kind of talking through sort of problems and solutions. That's actually pretty engaging, and I do quite. There's the kind of these moments where everybody gathers around the table. They're all discussing what do we do kind of next. Actually, I quite like that stuff. And some of the characters and interactions have, except for Barda, who never. This is unique for me. In any of these games, I always try and swap my party up often as possible, but I never take Balara because I find her so. So.
It's funny. I saw someone on I think Twitter be like, actually, I kind of enjoy that the characters are so terrible because now I just pick my characters based on what's optimal rather than who I like the best.
Yeah, I mean, I like Harding. I like Nev. I like Lucanus a lot. Lucanus and Davrin are really. I feel attacked because I have made characters who are like characters in a bunch of different places and ways. I had a whole story that I was writing for maybe a year and a half. We ended up with like 150,000 story. This woman, and the whole plot of this story, it was kind of it was a little bit like Roman Empire bullshit, whatever. But my character, Griffins were an important part of sort of the lore of this fantasy, sort of like, and finding out that Griffins, which everyone thought were extinct because we used them as aerial cavalry, died. Great Griffin legions. But there's actually Griffins and they're still alive, and so he gets a Griffin in his training. I was like, oh my god, Dragon Age is calling me out so badly. It's hilarious. And then Lucanus as sort of this magic assassin with that accent is so personally attacking me because he has the Spanish accent that Mateo has. For like Mateo Vasquez, and then I also do this. I have another character who has this sort of who does this kind of magic assassin blend thing that Lucanus kind of has, and I just feel so deeply attacked at all times that these characters. I was like, I thought I was interesting. I thought I was clever. No, like.
Oh man, my main two for most of the game were Emmerich and Lucanus, and then occasionally I'd swap in Davrin for like tactical reasons or whatever. But
I like Lucanus a lot. He's a lot of fun. I just love that deep Antonio Banderas Spanish accent. One of my favorites.
I was in love with kind of like like the Spanish Italian Mediterranean whole thing there, right? Like Uh,
Yeah. So in your mind, Treviso is Spain and Minrathous is Italian, or is it the other
no,
way?
no, no, no. It's Treviso is
Because
like,
Treviso is Venice. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Treviso. Well, Treviso is like kind of a mashup, right? Like
Hmm.
of like it is like generic Mediterranean or generic, not generic Mediterranean because it's obviously not Greek, but it's like like it is like Italy, Spain ish, right? Like
Yeah, it was funny because I remember you said, "Did you save Fantasy Italy or Fantasy Spain?" And I was like, "Man, they're kind of both." Because Treviso, they have a Spanish accent, and kind of the sort of the like grand merchant city sort of thing feels pretty Spanish, but also it has canal. That's these
yeah,
canals, whatever. It is, and that's Venice, right? Which is obviously a huge power in the Middle Ages, and then Minrathous, uh, Minrathous is sort of the echoes of this, once mighty empire. It's like, oh, this is Rome, right?
yeah. No,
We're dealing with Rome, but at the same time, they have this like inquisitional element or whatever. I was like, that's also Spain, which is an empire.
yeah. So I did not mean to characterize them that way. I think I asked you if you had made the choice yet, and then I said, have you been to Fantasy Italy, Spain, Italy / Spain yet? And I
Oh,
meant
okay.
that have you been to Treviso yet? Um,
Yeah.
um, Minrathous
Just
is
remember, do you remember when we had that insanely long argument about whether or not the Qun caliphates, the Islamic caliphates of the Middle Ages, or it was modern China because they had education camps? You and I had an argument about this, I think 10 years ago for
I was gonna
like
say like because I didn't play enough of the early games to like really have like a strong thing there, right? Like, but yeah, no, that makes some amount of sense. The Cune, Cune's interesting. I don't know this
yeah.
the I there was a lot of this game that I felt like it was like, well, that's a big revelation for somebody who's been following the series for a long time, right? Like the like
It's funny. I really like Dragon Age, but I have fallen a little bit out of love with Dragon Age Guard, and I think part of it is that I do think the writing has gotten sort of like worse in this hugboxy kind of way, but it's also because I think that really the characters aren't as good as they used to be. Dragon Age 2, which was much beloved at the time, had some truly excellent character writing. You had Aveline. It was Aveline, Varric. You had Isabella. Who doesn't love Isabella? You had Meryl. Oh, Meryl is Bellara written well. You know what I mean? Meryl and Bellara are Meryl being the elven, the kind of, I don't know, elven mage or whatever, who's obsessed with ancient elven magic tech kind of thing. No, I reject that. I know, I'm sorry. But my sort of deep love for the early era of Dragon Age characters is not something that I feel like has aged well. And I liked Inquisition quite a lot. And I even remember liking the characters in Inquisition. But now that I'm playing with these characters in Veilguard and I'm not connected to them in the same way that I was connected to whatever Fenris and Isabella or something like that, right? Fenris and Varric, right? In Inquisition, well, I like Cassandra quite a lot. Obviously I like Varric, who just he's iconic. I love the Iron Bull. He's amazing, right? But there is sort of a deprecation, I would maybe say, in terms of the character, because there's a lot of characters in Inquisition who I ended up kind of not caring about. I don't super like Cole. I don't really care all that much about Blackwall, right? And in Veilguard, I'm feeling a little. I like a lot of the profiles of the characters that I'm interacting with, but I'm just like, the glue isn't there in the way that I had with I don't know, with earlier Dragon Age games. So falling a little bit out of love with the world.
yeah, no, that's fair. There's some crazy stuff in there. Like Lou early on was like, there's some like weird, like some crazy lore dumps, right? Like, and it's like there are some crazy lore dumps, right? Like you find out some nutso stuff towards the middle bit. Like, have you been exploring around the Nexus a bunch? I think that's what it's called. The Crossroads, not the Nexus.
I've done a little bit of exploring. And doing Soulless Memories. I've done a couple of.
Okay. If you are like me, you will have all of Solus's memories by the time you get to actually like experience like the second part of that. And that's
Okay.
just kind of like a whole thing. That's pretty fucking nuts.
I just did the one where he sacrificed a bunch of spirits. He like gathered a bunch of spirits and he told them to go kill themselves so that they could steal the relic.
Later on, there's a part 2 where you like place the statues that you get down and you get some more lore out of it, and that's pretty crazy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I will say my favorite part of this is Solus. My favorite part of any of these things, whenever I get the mission that's like, you should go talk to Solus fucking dreams, I'm like, hell yeah. I love that part, right? You know, because even though I kind of hate I hate a little bit of the construction of Solus around a I don't even know how I would put this. I sort of hate the construction of Solus around like Thanos, the kind of the Thanos archetype, right? Where, oh, I was doing a bad thing, but it was we've talked about this. I'm really tired of that kind of like villain archetype. But the way they've handled him is actually, you know, this is the thing that I do love, which is Superman and Lex Luthor teaming up to fight Darkseid, which is exactly the feeling that I want out of Solus. I love when Solus says shitty things to you and you get to stick it to him and you get to go, you know what? Go fuck yourself. Okay, buddy. Like, we wouldn't be in this if it wasn't for you, kind of thing. And that's where I feel like the game is it's sort of hugboxy, right? Which because you give it to Solus and he gives it right back. You guys don't resolve this shit tension. You are fighting, even if you are on the same sort of. Love that tension, really.
Interesting. Yeah. No, and I will say for most of the storylines, I saw the kind of like there's a couple different twists and turns happening, but there's a big one that I didn't see coming. So I'm looking forward to whenever you hit that. So, yeah. It was good, but I don't want to say if it was great. What else? I've been playing Nine Souls, gifted to me by a friend of the cast, Mark.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I don't love that game. I have not played that game, but I love how that game. I don't know whether I should say this. There was another game that came out that is a lot like Nine Souls that we almost signed, and they backed out at the last minute and went with another publisher who is shittier than us. Way worse than us. And that game got absolutely shit canned by Nine Souls, and I feel a weird amount of schadenfreude about that.
Yeah. Fair enough, but it is a good game. I also finally 5 years later played like the first hour of Disco Elysium, which I enjoy, right? Like it is a weird game and I'm here for it. So I also played like an hour of Path of Exile too, which I could see myself giving way too much time to, but I'm probably gonna wait until it hits 1.0 or close to it to really put a ton of time into it. I don't know. I've just been kind of like bouncing around stuff because like I haven't been feeling a ton of stuff. Deadlock is still fun. I haven't played it yet, but I reinstalled League of Legends. I was like, I was watching
because you're watching Trin Immortal.
I was watching Trin Immortal, and I was like, I don't know if I'm feeling like, and Supervive is fun, but like friend of the cast Monic is not able to play multiplayer right now, and it seems like whenever I have time to play, Lou is playing D&D with you, so she won't play Supervive with me yet.
Why can't Monic play multiplayer games?
Oh, he's with family, and so he just like doesn't have the right setup for it.
Yeah, fair enough.
And what else?
You should play Total War Warhammer 3, okay, buddy? They just released new content. Blood for the Blood God, Skulls for the Skull Throne, Arbal Skull Taker. What a beautiful. Actually, to be honest, it is just okay, which is a little disappointing because I've been looking forward to this for the longest time, and it's caused a little bit of an uproar in the Total War community. But basically, they introduced four total new legendary lore, but 3 are the paid ones, and 2 of them have a teleportation mechanic, which players are kind of revolted. One of them is called Gold bag man-eater, who most people call Golg for kind of obvious reasons. And he is a true mercenary ogre. And so what he can do is I think it's like every couple of turns, he can sort of bind himself to a faction in a war. So two factions are at war, take a contract with that faction as a mercenary and fight on their behalf, which is very cool. Everybody's kind of sort of mercenary contract thing for a long time. But the thing is that when you take a contract, you can teleport to your patron. So if I take a contract in Reichland, right, I can teleport to Altdorf, right? And then I can teleport to Lustria, and then I can teleport to Old, which really sort of defeats a lot of the purpose of playing a big grand strategy game where you have to logistics of kind of. And then Arbol Skulltaker, whose whole lore is, he's this great champion of Khorne, and basically he is Khorne's answer to, arrogant warriors. If you think that you are the hot shit, if you think that you are the coolest fighter in the fucking land, then Khorne says Arbol Skulltaker to quite literally go take your skull and weave it into his cloak skulls, right? And Arbol has an ability to teleport to lords where, as lords kind of gain favor, they're winning battles or whatever else, they kind of accumulate this currency. And when you kill them, you cash that currency and up your cloak of skulls kind of thing, which makes sense for his lore and everything like that. But it does mean that you're teleporting around the map, right? Which is just kind of a weird, I don't want to say unintuitive, because it's not that it's unintuitive. It's just like, it's not a version of things that people in strategy games. And so it's sort of an interesting angle that Warhammer has sort of boxed itself kind of into. There's also a big flattening of Warhammer about, and this is the true, which is that a lot of the factions feel a little samey. Khorne used to have this thing where he had no growth buildings. You could not grow your settlement with a building. The way that you grew your settlements with Khorne is your armies as they fought battles consecutively. So if you fought a battle every turn, right? So you fight a battle, you're immune to the next turn, you fight a battle kind of thing. You got what's called bloodletting, which just shows how powerful your guys are. And when you get to max bloodletting stacks, you have a growth up. You contribute growth to all of your provinces at once. So the only way that Khorne used to grow was by fighting guys, right? But they got rid of that and they just gave him growth buildings. And I understand why that change got made, because it is a little imbalanced and not the best. But at the same time, it removes this level of differentiation between sort of the, differentiation between sort of the mechanics, the different factions. And stuff like that has cropped up in a bunch of other places too. So for instance, you no longer have tech buildings that require like military buildings that require the creation of other military buildings in order to function. So what you used to have great swords, but great swords couldn't, like Empire great swords, right? But Empire great swords couldn't be recruited until you built a smithy, right? So you could get them from the normal barracks, but once you got the smithy, that's when you could pump them out, which is a very normal strategy game thing. But they've removed all of those interactions, which means that players are kind of getting powerful units earlier. You're phasing out your early game units. It's just like stuff like that is, not the most fun. And so, yeah, I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's fair. It sounds like they're kind of like moving Warhammer back in line with kind of like the classic Total War games, where like the in Rome Total War, it's the Englishmen had like or the Bretonians had like a couple of unique units, but it's not like you had totally different army lists. So that's interesting. I realized I didn't actually talk about anything about Nine Souls. It's a I said like it was good.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, that's my bad. It's a single player what's the word for it? Metroidvania style game. It's got some elements of like Dark Souls stuff, like like you talk about the soulsification of everything. And it's very hard, which I like. Like the combat is difficult, especially the big boss fights. And so there's a lot of kind of like running back and like trying to get your combos off well. And so and it's got like an interesting story. It's an interesting thing because like usually the way that these games with like deep lore play out is like the character has amnesia or something. In this case, your character knows exactly what's happening. He just doesn't like tell the camera, so the player doesn't know, right? Like, like you're being revealed bits of things from your main character that he obviously knows that he's just not telling you, even though you're ostensibly controlling him, which is interesting. But it's got some interesting bits in it. It's like the art makes it look like it's like like this cat samurai. Turns out you're on like this is like a very mild spoiler. You're on like a big spaceship, and and the humans, or the ape men as they call them, are kind of like subjugated by the cat people, and your main character has a problem with the other cat people, and you don't quite understand what it all is. But it's a pretty cool game. I also tried out Marvel Rivals, which is like Marvel does Overwatch. And
yeah, everybody's going nuts about that.
Have you played any of it?
It doesn't appeal to me, to be honest with you.
Really? I thought you were big into Overwatch.
I like it's all. I mean, I don't know. I did like Overwatch quite a lot. I think really what I mean to say is it doesn't appeal to me now because other games just have my attention. Total Vanguard, Veilguard, WoW, whatever.
That's totally fair. I don't see myself going back to it much, just because like I am kind of over hero shooters, quad hero shooters. Although it is a little bit slower than the other types of games. It was one of those things where it was like I jumped to games like I don't want to feel like really reading a ton of text. I'm just gonna try out Groot, right? And like I played Groot for a while, and I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I got like MVP of the game. Like, how the fuck did I manage this, right? Like, I was listening to somebody else talk. It's like, it's the new hotness, and it's free to play. That means like all of the children are like playing this game. So like being mildly competent means that you're like actually pretty good at the game. And Groot's just kind of like naturally tanky, and I think I had a pretty decent healer on my side as well. Marvel versus game, no thank you. Not interested. Man who owns 3 copies of Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Yeah. Have you ever played Marvel versus Capcom, the fighting game?
Yeah. Long time ago.
Okay.
I don't even remember who I remember I played. Is there a guy, one of the Capcom characters? He's a guy, I think he's like blue with a red scarf, and he has this bladed tonfa. Do you know what I'm talking about? That was the guy I played.
Blue with a red scarf and a bladed tonfa. You're not talking about Zero, are you? The Mega Man character? No, because he's mostly red.
No, come on, Marvel.
Is it which Marvel versus Capcom is this?
Oh man, I have.
Is it 3D graphics or 2D graphics?
2D graphics, I want to say.
Okay, it's probably 2 then, because no one, Marvel Heroes is not like a big one. Dude, let me see if I can figure this out. I was just curious because Marvel versus it, that is like the big one.
Yeah, can I find? Oh man, it's their like faces.
Strider? Yeah, it's Strider. Strider, hear you. I didn't realize that was a Tonfa, but it totally is.
Strider.
Hiryu.
All right. Oh yeah, it was this guy. Yeah, yeah. So this is the guy I played in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Or at least this was like my main guy. He's the only guy. I'm sure because it's the one where you have your backup guy.
Well, you have right? three. Ever since the second game, you have 3 characters and you active tag. It's a hyper fighter. I never could get into them because I'm just like not good enough to do 7 billion hit touch of deaths. And also tiering is more important in hyper fighters than it is in other types of games because there's some combinations that have access to what is effectively a touch of death, which means that they're like top tier level competitiveness, and just like I didn't care enough to like practice those routes. Like I tend to play grapplers who are like less touch of death and more kind of like 50-50s and whatnot. I haven't been playing a ton of Street Fighter though, just because I haven't felt the call. But what else? Otherwise, I want to recommend a YouTube series called "The Most Upsetting Guessing Game in the World." They're in their third season. Are you familiar with Auntie Donna, the comedy group?
I don't think so.
They're an Australian comedy group, and they're also affiliated with this group called Grouse House. It's kind of funny because like you can tell that like they know that they're like the subgroup Auntie Donna is like the big draw, because like the first episode of every season will be like the three of them and then like some of their other people, and then like they'll rotate out some of the core groups so that other people can get some exposure. But have you ever heard of like it's like a party game called like like Party Personalities or something like that? It's like an improv game. Basically, you get like you have somebody who's hosting the party, and then you have three people that are like you give them like a characteristic, and the party guest has to guess what their characteristic is as the other three people play to that characteristic, right? Like something typical would be like like a single mother that is tired from her kid, for dealing with her kids all day or something like that, right? The most upsetting guessing game in the world is they do that, but the descriptions are all absurd and like paragraphs long, and like sometimes meta in a way that's like basically by the end of the episode, like everybody's just like furious at each other because they're trying to get these impossible to guess things, and like there's like vague mental breakdowns happening for you, and it's fucking hilarious. And I
okay, interesting, yeah.
Like I said, there's 3 seasons of it. The most recent season is pretty freaking good. But just to like give you an example, one of the traits for one of the players was every time the host makes a guess, you say you're so close, and if she calls you out on it, like if she says it, you say, look at me, I'm not, this isn't part of it, right? Like, and like, that is the thing that the person then had to guess, right? Like that was like the trait, and it's just, it's madness, and it is fun to watch over the course of an hour, watch other people make themselves miserable for your entertainment. Yeah. So I highly recommend that. I've also been YouTube Shorts has been feeding me clips of House, and like that's a good fucking show. I kind of want to go back and watch
I
House.
have heard of the rediscovery of House phenomenon. Somebody was talking about this recently, just like on like a podcast or something. Maybe it was in a YouTube video that I was watching about how House clips on YouTube get these millions. Go and rewatch the whole show. I've actually never watched all of House. I've only watched some of House.
Same.
But I'm also not huge onto medical dramas sort of in the first place. So
I watched House from the premiere. Because like it was like when we were like in high school, and it came on after American Idol, and I didn't watch American Idol. I watched House, which was
that's because you're
smarter
than the average girl.
I would say like this is like being a Rick
like other girls. Okay,
this is like being a Rick and Morty fan before Rick and Morty was.
I actually watch Lost, which is really cerebral. Okay, like that's the like mid-aughts version of.
It's funny though, because like it was in that period of time when like you still didn't have like as much access to like overseas media, right? Because like Hugh Laurie is a British comic, right? Like that is his like that is like what he originally was, right? And so like I remember being like, it's like somebody posts on YouTube is like, bet you didn't know that Dr. House is actually English, and it's a picture of like, it's like a skit of him in like a wig, like with his like amazing British accent, or like his natural British accent. It's like that's not the Dr. House I know. I really enjoyed the first couple seasons, and I think I fell off because I just like couldn't be bothered to keep up with it.
Yep.
Lou says the last season is bad. I could believe that. I remember it starting to kind of go off the rails, like as they had to put him into more and more obnoxious situations. I think canonically he went to Johns Hopkins because of course he does, because he's like the world's greatest diagnostician. So
Sure.
yeah, yeah. But I might go back and watch that instead of just like watching endless YouTube shorts. There was actually
Or The Sopranos, obviously.
Well,
we're getting to the end of it.
yeah. I'm getting close to the end of it. I don't know. I'll save my thoughts for when it's finished. We'll get there soon.
Okay. Yeah, this is the big road.
Yeah.
The final road to go down. Okay, the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, we saw the premiere of Chris's movie, Cleaver.
Cleaver, yes. Oh my God.
Yeah. And all the fallout from that. What else? Yeah, no, it's been I'm kind of looking forward to the end of it, because like I was telling Caroline the other day, is like I realized after like we got up, she was like, it's like, something wrong? Are you mad at me? It's like, no, I realized that like the people are so awful in The Sopranos that I like feel like we're like having a fight, even though we're not at all, right? Like we're just watching.
Truly, the vibes are rancid. Yeah, I get that. 100%.
It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I just like like that's the mental space this fucking puts me in. It's like, yeah, well, it's over soon, so we'll be yeah. Anything else? As part of my YouTube Shorts exploration, there's this guy called like Pirate Software, who's I think some sort of indie dev, but he used to be.
I know him.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I met him a year ago, 2 years ago.
He apparently used to be.
He works for Offbeat, right?
I don't know.
Is that what you're talking about?
No, okay, I'm going to talk about how he used to be like customer support or like a QA engineer at Blizzard.
Whoa!
And I
actually did not know that about him.
Yeah, he tells these stories about how the one that really got to me was essentially there was a 2-factor authentication exploit that like people could get past. And he tells a story about how there are these gold selling cartels, and they managed to sneak past. Like they managed to like.
Oh, I know what he's talking about. Yeah, absolutely. This thing is real. Yeah.
Yeah, and like he gets past they get past the 2-factor authentication, and 2 of the 3 cartels like start hacking a ton of accounts and just like dumping gold into the market. And apparently the 3rd cartel went to Blizzard and like told them how they were doing it, because he wanted them to stop them so that the price of gold would go back up so that they could stabilize the market. Which is just like, that like the gold cartels like basically patching the worst exploit, like, telling Blizzard about their worst exploits so that like, the other cartels couldn't like take advantage of them. It's just like the most hilarious thing in the world to me. I just thought that was awesome. But yeah, but that's been the big things I've been doing. This week. You have anything else that you've been doing this week that you want to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, we hit on most of it. I've been packing.
Yeah. Which is why you don't have a green screen today.
Which is why I don't have a green screen. The green screen's in the fucking pod. Are you excited to help us unpack? We're going to have a big unpacking party where you guys get to help us unpack the pod on Christmas. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, like, I'm back the weekend after.
Yeah, I don't think you're even going to be around.
Yeah, but, if there's anything to unpack on, like, January 4th, I'm happy to help.
Wait, January 4th? You're not back for New Year's?
No, I'm flying to Florida to see my fiance's family for New Year's.
Okay. Man, who was I talking to? Maybe I was talking to Josh about New Year's or something. Yeah.
Josh, who has eight days of a family holiday to deal with, and so he doesn't have to be there for any particular one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
All right. Well, if that's everything you have, we can wrap it up then. If you'd like to email us about any things we talked about on the podcast, you can email us at derpsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsplaygames.com. You could follow us on twitch.tv/derpsplaygames or youtube.com/@derpsplaygames, where these go out live. What else is there to say about this? Rate, reviews on iTunes. All links down in the description. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I don't think so.
I saw that there was like a trailer for like a video for the Airbikes game by the people.
Oh yeah, Airframe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a big thing on Friday was part of the live stream, the AFU stuff like that. We have a couple of more videos coming out, but this is just like low level stuff. Okay, this isn't like the big stuff that I want to go hard for. When the airframe beta comes around, are you gonna play in it? Are you gonna give me a bunch of airframe feedback?
Is it an open beta or is it like your VIP beta thing?
It's like a Discord thing. Well, it's not like the VIP Discord thing that but it's basically just people in the Discord sign up for the beta and then we give them a key kind of thing.
All right, we'll talk about it off air because I might have to get clearance from my employer, but I will be willing to do. Like, I'm willing to do that about once a year. I'm just not willing to do it like multiple times a year for.
There's gonna be a bunch of them, so
okay. Yeah. No, I mean, there have been other games that I've avoided signing up for the beta for because I didn't want to go through the rigmarole of talking to my employer about getting an exemption. So
yeah, all the time. Yeah, I get that.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.